Look, a general rule of thumb is if you're gonna do something that's basically a visual novel or a walking simulator or anything that's a game but is really writing heavy, that writing better be real, real good. And it is in this one. Of the Devil. So, I got commissioned to play this. It's been a long time. It's been years since somebody commissioned me to play a video game. Largely because I ask for a lot more money for video games now than the first time it happened, because I really didn't account for how long it was going to take last time. But this is an episodic, mostly visual novel. It has some mechanics, and I'll get to those. This is an episodic cyberpunk mystery-esque sort of series. I played episode 0, which is free to play, and I am going to talk about with no spoilers for as long as I can. And I'll give you a little bit about episode 1 without getting into spoilers either. Because I want to give you my broad thoughts, but then I am going to want to talk spoilers a little bit later, but I'll give you a heads up. So this is a not, I don't want to say completely stereotypical, but not massively deviating from what you normally tend to think of when you think of cyberpunk corporate dystopian settings. So, we have a future. There are androids and holograms being used for a lot of the work. If you work at a corporation, the corporation basically owns you. They have remade company towns as a thing, and they own entire apartment blocks where you work, eat, and sleep. And basically, if you're awake, you're working. Yeah, that kind of corporate dystopia. And in this game, you play Morgan, and Morgan is a criminal attorney. So in episode 0, she gets called in to basically to help and she gets called in more or less as a public defender. Basically, the way she gets work, if she doesn't have someone she's already officially working for, as their lawyer on retainer, which comes up a bit more in the it's so annoying. I have to say the second episode, but technically it's episode 1 because the first one's called episode 0. Anyways, basically when a criminal lawyer is needed, it goes out on a gig app effectively. And she grabs this and goes in and finds that her client that she's just nabbed is being accused of actually being a serial killer. Not because there is evidence linking him to all of the crimes of the so-called Heartbreak Killer, but because there is a lot of evidence linking him to the latest victim, and that victim was killed in the exact same method as the other deaths from the same killer. So while the cops are prepared to nail this guy for the entire thing, it all hinges on the idea that he definitely did this most recent one, and therefore it logically follows he did the others. So Morgan comes in, has a limited amount of time to get the information, talk to the cops, talk to her new client, and then figure out what she can do with that. Episode 1, the second one, which is also significant. These are actually pretty meaty, these episodes. Episode 0 is the shorter of the two, but episode 1 that's a decent length on it for a single episode. I mean, granted, I say that I haven't played a lot of episodic games, but it was longer than I thought it was going to be. But in the second one, Morgan gets called in because, well, oh boy, it's complicated. What's the simplest way I can say this? She has been friends for some time with a pivotal figure in the tech world, a guy named David Asher. I say guy, the visuals on him are real interesting because he's incredibly femme-coded, but his name's David and everyone says he. So it's interesting. But anyways, David and Morgan know each other from way back, and Morgan is technically listed as his attorney in criminal affairs if it ever comes up, and it hasn't really up to this point. But the thing is, David is dead, and nobody really knows why, and you're not initially involved in solving that. Morgan is initially brought in because David's assistant had already put something on the schedule where Morgan was going to take ownership of this, what appears to be, at least initially, the sort of prototype new android model named Sarah. And so Morgan finds herself in the middle of trying to figure out, what happened to David, what is going on with all this, what's the deal with Sarah, while trying to also, cover her own rear, because obviously when you deal with this much corporate nonsense, there's a lot of backstabbing going on. So that's the overall premise of the second one. They're both good. I like episode 0 a little better, but they're both good. And the writing's phenomenal, just across the board. The characters are incredibly well realized. The world is very thought out. Like, as I said, I don't want to call it stereotypical, but it's not a massive reinvention. They're not reinventing the wheel with this as a cyberpunk setting. It's kind of familiar, but there's a lot of small little tweakings and the fine details, the kind of thing that you get from people who really care about the details, who went in and went, okay, we're not going to just take it as a given that the corporations took over and all this. Let's get in here down to the nitty gritty and really think about how this impacts things. So right down to the fact that, like, when you get information, like you read an article of something, you get like 4 paragraphs and then it hits us, you are not subscribed to our service if you want the full story, and then it just cuts you off. So stuff like that. We get a little bit of background of the legal framework of how things have gotten to the way they are. We get details like how basically every gun is fully registered to the point that cops, upon entering a building, can actually shut off manually every registered gun in the building. And it's very difficult to get an unregistered gun. You basically can't, because you can't like get a gun shop owner to sell you one under the table, because the gun shops are all now run by holograms who obey the rules. They're tenants. They have to obey their tenants. That's sort of the rules of robotics in this universe, except there's like over 100 of them. So there's details like that. And actually, going back to the Heartbreak Killer, the reason there's this killer who hasn't been caught is whoever it is managed to get their hands on an old-fashioned revolver that, doesn't use any of the current technology and isn't really detectable by it. But that was kind of sort of episode 0. And I think, like, all the characters are really good and really well fleshed out. And like, there's a lot of thought that went into a lot of things, because there's things that you'll learn about what drives certain characters. And there's like times where it's like, it would have been really easy. And I can see most things like just saying, well, it's this, but it's like here they'd rather go, okay, it is this, but also nuance maybe. And, with me and my preferences, I'm like, nuance, yes, please and thank you. Can I have more? And then it goes, yes, actually, here's some more. So I really, really like the writing. The art style took a little bit for me to get used to. I do want to clarify, I like the design, but when I say design, I mean like the overall notions and thoughts behind the characters, and especially the wardrobes given to them. Like I would kind of love to cosplay as Morgan. I'm not going to lie. But the actual artistic style that these designs are rendered in took me a little getting used to. The eyes are kind of off-putting. I'm not going to lie. I did get used to it as time went on. It's probably worth noting there is no voice work in this. It is all text. So that's why I'm putting a lot of emphasis on the writing. Because the writing has to bring across these personalities, since there are no actors, to sort of add additional life to lines. Something that I think I've found to be the case recently, because this was also the case in Night in the Woods, where I feel like really story-heavy things where it's very clear that the characters in the story and the writing is the point. I feel like when there isn't a voice, there isn't voice acting, there can often be a lot more work put into it, because when you have a voice actor, that's not to say you can like get lazy, but you can kind of ease off being over precise with the dialogue and the way you write the characters, because you're going to have actors bringing a certain amount of personality and persona and characterization to it. But if you don't have that, you really need to bring it across in the writing, because even though these characters have portraits, they're not animated. They are a handful of still images and they don't have many poses. So it really comes down to just the writing, and it's all right there. It's really good. I haven't talked about the mechanics. The thing is, there aren't many, and they come up in limited situations, like many sort of visual novel sort of things. The mechanics basically amount to exhausting all of the dialogue options and finding everything there is. You're either going to take the time to look at everything or you're not, and if you're not, you're going to put yourself at a disadvantage. So of course you're going to look at everything and find every bit of information you can. The only real mechanics come into play during, well, initially the sort of the face-off with the police with your client in episode 0, and then later on when you're actually in court in episode 1. And while I appreciate what the mechanics are going for, I don't like them. Yeah, this is kind of the sticking point. Thankfully, it didn't ruin the experience because the writing is so good that these sections make up such a minority of it that it didn't completely ruin the experience. That having been said, especially in episode 1, I got really mad. Like, to the point that because I streamed this, the last few sessions that I played, I just shamelessly had a walkthrough open. The instant I even, forget hit a wall, glimpsed a wall, I'm like, I'm just going to the walkthrough, because I was enjoying the writing so much and I hated feeling my experience ruined by the mechanics. Again, I don't want to say the mechanics can't work for anybody, but for my brain and the way my brain works, I chafed against them hard. So I need to explain this. It's a little bit Phoenix Wrighty. In so far as, the prosecution is making their case and you have certain pieces of evidence that you can bring up at different points, and you can raise an objection into a certain part of the statements that have been made by the other side and whatnot. And in theory, that's fine, but they've sort of added a gambling kind of mechanic to you, where things are represented by cards. It's like you're raising and betting, and there's a blackjack portion. And ultimately, here was my biggest problem with it. You'll have opportunities to be okay, do you want to go harder on this point, or do you want to stay and just let things pass? Or here's the different things you can bring up. What point do you want to bring up that you think will be damaging to what is being said? And this wasn't an issue for me in episode 0, but it was a big issue for me in episode 1. The problem was, while you get a very generalized, well, here's what this piece of evidence generally says, I would look at these and I didn't understand what point Morgan would theoretically make. So if it paused and it's okay, do you want to say something right now? Do you want to bring up any of these points? I'm looking at the points that I'm allowed to bring up, and none of them seem super relevant. And there are some times you're just not supposed to bring up anything, but even times well, very obviously I'm supposed to say something, but I'm looking at these and going, okay, for what they just said, I guess I could bring up this, but I don't understand what it is Morgan would do with that. For the idea of what relevance any given piece of evidence had, I didn't know where Morgan would go with it. It reminded me of something Yahtzee Croshaw said about, I think it was L.A. Noire, with the interrogation scenes there, where you'd pick, doubt, but then suddenly your character would kind of fly off the handle and get really confrontational, and there was no indication that he would do that. That was kind of how I felt. Not that Morgan gets confrontational in that way, but I see these options and I'm well, I can pick that, but I don't know what she's going to do if I pick that. And it made me really freeze up and really almost never be able to suss out what the frickin' heck the game wanted from me in a lot of those sections. And I do think this is just a me thing, because like I said, it's not a million miles away from something like Phoenix Wright, which has a ton of fans. So I think this largely has to do with my neurodivergence, the way my brain works. But for the way my ADHD-riddled brain works, Mm. No, it didn't feel deductive because even when I was right, Morgan would like take something in a direction like, oh, if I'd realized that was what she was going to bring up about it, yeah, I would have known to do that. Or there'd be other times I'm like, well, this makes sense because it would make sense to me, but then it would go nowhere because she wouldn't bring it up in the way that I thought she would. So there would be this disconnect between me and what she would do with my selections that really made those portions really hard for me. But I don't want to dwell on that too much because, as I said, I had a walkthrough, and I say that with no shame, and I still really enjoyed the games ultimately. But I did chafe hard against the mechanics. Oh, the one other thing I want to talk about before I get into spoilery stuff. I think my favorite character may be the adjutant. So when they get into court, there's this android body that's meant to more or less be the judge. It's a little bit more complicated and nuanced than that, but that's the short version. And there's sort of a grouping of different adjutant not personalities, I don't know, but programs that get uploaded into this body, and some of them are a little bit quirky. And the one you get is just this very distractible valley girl kind of thing, and at some points, like she's playing on it looks like a Game Boy Advance, and like she's still a competent judge, but her personality it kind of reminds me of like the eccentric ship personalities in something like Ian Banks's The Culture. If you've read any of those books, she kind of reminded me of that. It was good. I liked it a lot. But I'm going to get into spoilers now because there are some really interesting things to talk about with stuff that is blatantly spoilery. So you've been warned. All right. So, end of episode 0. I already put this up as a short, but it blew my freaking mind because, we're going through the whole thing of Morgan defending this guy, who's been accused of being the Heartbreak Killer. And at the very end, after she's proven that it could not possibly have been him, we get this reveal. She's like, oh, no, I knew you were innocent. And then we flash back to why she knows he's innocent, because she is the Heartbreak Killer. She killed not only this newest victim, but 5 other people before that, and who knows how many people prior to that, because apparently she changes up her MO intermittently, and it's just a thing that she does. It's kind of a Dexter feeling for the character, not in the sense that like she has a code that she follows necessarily. There's actually no strong indicator of that, but like she's been doing this for a while and she knows how to not get caught. And one of the ways that she doesn't get caught is to change up her methods. Like she's stuck with Heartbreak for a while because she could, for as long as she had ammo for this 6-shooter. But once she expended all 6 bullets, that was done. She'll do something else next time. And this isn't necessarily criticism, but if after that reveal you are expecting it to be picked up on immediately in episode 1, it's not going to be. It just becomes something you are aware of about Morgan as it launches into this next story. I haven't played episode 2. I might at some point eventually, no promises. But sort of, I want to contrast that with there's a reveal of who killed David in the end of episode 1. The second one, yeah, confusing, right? And I want to contrast it because it's interesting. Because on the one hand, who it turns out to be is actually not very surprising. Actually, kind of at all, because the suspect pool is actually really small. So it was pretty easy to guess, or at least not be surprised by who it was, because there was really nobody they could sneak in and go, I never suspected you. Or like, there's like 6 people in this story. I suspected you. But what was really cool was, since it wasn't trying to necessarily have that be a big twist, it played up a little bit. But the far more interesting thing was when we find out the full nuance of why it is she did it. Because David, kind of expectedly, developed like proper AI, which is not only a thing that is feared, it is flat out illegal to do. So like all of the holograms and the androids and whatever, they have very limited capabilities, and they are not self-sustaining, self-aware AIs. But Sarah, who is now under Morgan's care, is. But we also find out David made a lot before Sarah. Sarah's the most advanced, but he made a lot and he kind of sent them out into the world. And we hear from Helen, who killed him, um, you know, how how messed up that was, what he did. And she brings a perspective that clearly David didn't have. It wasn't something that occurred to him, that the thing that he did, because she brings up this idea of like, he created sentient beings and he mixed them in with the androids that we send out to do labor. He created self-aware slaves. He created sentient beings that he's putting out, and they don't know what they are, and they might eventually realize it, but they're just out there among these things that aren't fully self-sustaining and fully self-aware and aren't thinking, and these things that are going to be treated like that. And she just took such moral offense to that. And it's a great point. But also, even though David's dead, we get enough of a glimpse of him to understand that that was something that he almost certainly didn't think of and didn't account for, but it wasn't malice. He wasn't trying to do something awful, but also he kind of did. And again, that's kind of what I mean by there's way more nuance introduced into all this than you would expect. And that's just kind of the caliber of writing across the board for this. Also, really great touch. There's a bonus scene after episode 1 where you can talk to the medical examiner. And you can ask about a trans flag on her desk. And she actually brings up, because as is not uncommon in a cyberpunk setting, like there's body modifications, it's all very common. She brings up, you know, I have that pride flag because if I didn't, no one would know. And there wouldn't be visibility, because people can just swap out parts as they want. Nobody has to know anymore. But I feel like something's lost if there's no awareness that being trans is a thing. And again, just this thoughtfulness that has gone into all these layers and all these characters. It's because I chafe against the mechanics, and because, you know, actually like making choices in the conversation aren't really mechanics and don't really affect the plot. I kind of want this to be, I don't know, an animated, even an audio series. I would happily voice the adjutant if they ever want to do that, for the record. I would love to voice that thing. But yeah, I liked it a lot. Issues with the mechanics aside, this was really good. Of the Devil. Have you played it? Episode 0, which is free. Episode 1. Have you played episode 2? What'd you think of that one? I haven't yet, but whatever your thoughts might be, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Patreon pays the bills and is, in fact, I was commissioned to take a look at this. Any amount you can help me over there is a really huge assistance, but even if you can't, don't worry too much about it. Almost did the wrong sign off. We take a relaxed attitude around here, so just come on back next time you need. And now to thank my highest supporting patrons: Robin Moore, Jared Boyce, Zubin Lafula, Auntie Kate 808, Mara G, Angry Casperl, Dave Hall, Oliver B, Mystic Shadow, Sean Miller, Welsh Wrestling Geeks, Melissa Pedersen, Becky Sparks, Twilord, Tracy Scrabbit, Pal Barabajoggle, Magdalena, Sir Didymus is my favorite. And to thank some supporters from the lower tiers, thank you to Wordmaker, Lucy Llewellyn, and Beginner's Mind Podcast. And if you want to hear me say your name as well, you can check out the rewards on the Patreon, and there's other stuff besides, and it'll help keep these absurd creatures fed.